Hello and welcome back to the North Somerset Educational Psychology Service online training library. This two-part series focuses on understanding behaviour as a form of communication, including an explanation of the theory and examples of how to apply the theory in practice. So in this video we will define what we mean by behaviour as communication, and then we'll consider some of the underlying needs that children have which are expressed through their behaviour. And in the next video, we'll focus on examples of strategies and resources we can use in early years and primary school settings to reduce unwanted behaviour. The examples of good practice in this video are taken from research by Dr. Dulcie Gray into the emotional well-being in early years settings in North Somerset. Let's start with a simple summary. The central idea of the behaviour as a form of communication theory is that children's actions express their needs. Their behaviour is their way of communicating how they are feeling, their opinions and their desires. When they don't have the words or emotional skills to explain what's going on inside, children do their best to have their needs met using their behaviour. For example, if a child is upset or overwhelmed, they might cry, lash out or withdraw. Instead of seeing these behaviours as bad or difficult, the behaviour as communication approach encourages adults to understand what the child is trying to communicate through their actions, whether it's frustration, boredom, hunger, or needing comfort. By recognising behaviour as communication, we can try to address the underlying need rather than just correcting the behaviour. This reduces an unwanted behaviour by solving the underlying problem. A simple telling off is less likely to achieve this if the underlying need remains. So let's set the scene by thinking about some common behaviours in early years and primary school settings that children might be using to tell us that they are in need of something. Examples of this include tantrums, aggression, withdrawal, controlling, refusing to share, or clinginess. What we need to bear in mind is that these behaviours from children are not part of a planned strategy, they're a reaction. They are the result of problems expressing what they need, and the best way to help them is by interpreting their needs for them. There are lots of clues and pieces of background information that can help us interpret what a child's behaviour means about their underlying needs. For example, we can think about their stage of development. Each stage of development introduces new abilities and understanding for the world, which in turn introduces new needs. This means that, as children develop, the range of needs they may have increases. It doesn't mean it necessarily gets harder to take care of them, it's just that there are more possible needs that they are expressing through their behaviour. In our early years and reception year settings, we're generally working with children aged between 2 and 5. And when we look at the needs of this age group, we see that sometimes the needs are opposed to each other. For example, young children often want to feel safe and protected by adults, but also free to explore. They often want nurturing experiences, but also tastes of independence. They want to play games with other children, but also to be in control of the games and not have to wait for others. So what's clear is that young children's needs are complex and sometimes contradictory. And this can mean that we see drastic swings in behaviour. From behaviour which is really independent and grown up, for example when they pretend to be teachers and we hear them using phrases we have used, swinging to behaviour which we associate with younger children, for example wanting a cuddle when they're startled by an unexpected noise. As well as having needs associated with their stage of development, there are many external influences on young children which can give them needs which are expressed through their behaviour. For example, there may be emotional triggers, like situations which cause fear or frustration, or there could be environmental factors like noises, textures, sights and smells which are difficult to process and sometimes overwhelming, or maybe physical needs like hunger, tiredness or illness, or new social or relationship factors like other children not sharing or being separated from special adults. On top of this, there are individual differences. For example, children have different personalities which affect their behaviour, different family dynamics, rules, expectations and ways of doing things, different early experiences which can have a huge effect on their behaviour, different cultural backgrounds, different physical health needs, and different special educational needs, for example, social communication difficulties, autism, Down syndrome. So every time we see a child's behaviour in our early year settings or primary school settings, we are observing the product of a complex combination of underlying needs. These needs reflect their developmental stage, external influences, and individual differences. We can make sense of this concept using the analogy of an iceberg. When we look at an iceberg, all we see is the tip, the bit which is above the water. However, the tip of the iceberg is always being propped up by a far greater mass underneath the water's surface. And this hidden mass represents the underlying needs of children in our early years and primary school settings. So, putting all of this together, we can summarise the behaviour as communication theory with maybe two key messages. And the first is that Understanding children's underlying needs helps us understand their behaviour. And it follows on from this that meeting their underlying needs helps us manage their behaviour. Some of the methods that children use to signal their needs, for example meltdowns or lashing out, are upsetting for them and the people around them. By interpreting their needs and meeting them, we reduce these forms of behaviour. So now we've covered the behaviour as communication theory, let's look at how we might begin to use it in real-life situations in our early years and reception year settings. And converting theory into practice requires us to answer 3 key questions about children's behaviour. In this video, we will work on answering the first question. In the next video in this series, we will look at how we can answer the next 2 questions. So let's start practicing interpreting children's needs from observing their behaviour. I'm going to read a short scenario describing a child's behaviour. While I'm doing this, have a think about what the behaviour might be communicating about the child's underlying needs. Think about the needs we've already looked at and any others you think that children in your settings have. Our first scenario features Sarah. Sarah is quietly playing with a set of building blocks. When Daniel approaches, Sarah immediately pulls the blocks closer to herself, shouting "No!" She becomes visibly upset and pushes Daniel away as he attempts to pick up a building block. So, what needs might Sarah be communicating with her behaviour? On the surface, what we see is Sarah's frustration and lashing out at Daniel. But underneath, she might be expressing that she doesn't know how to ask Daniel to leave her tower alone, or she might be expressing that she doesn't know how to share control of an activity, or that she feels scared about what will happen if someone else joins in. And there could be many other interpretations. The next scenario features Zach. Zach often interrupts circle time with loud noises or sudden movements. When the other children start singing or playing past the parcel, Zach tends to run around the room and often throws objects like crayons or small toys. So, what needs might Zach be communicating with his behaviour? Well, on the surface, what we see is running, throwing, and disrupting the group. But underneath, we might guess that he is expressing sensory processing needs such as being overwhelmed by noise or a need for movement, or expressing a difficulty sharing adult attention in a group, or a difficulty restraining his impulses. So the key message from this process is, children's behaviour is open to interpretation. Young children can't tell us what they need, so we need to keep an open mind. We need to test our different guesses about children's underlying needs until we notice a positive effect on their behaviour. And this will relieve frustration for them and the people around them. Thank you for watching the first video in this 2-part series. When you have the time, please watch part 2, which focuses on practical suggestions and advice for using the behaviour as a form of communication approach in foundation stage settings.